Today, I report from the North American city of Hamilton in Ontario, Canada, as I meet the first black councillor to be elected in the city. His inspirational political campaign message went down to the very ordinary people, highlighting his allegiance to the city in which he was raised.
These very valuable lessons of hard work, activism, equality, and social justice that I have been taught by my family and my community throughout my entire life have not been forgotten.
In a cold, snowy day, my guest welcomes me to the city of his choice as we discuss his political journey and explore his African and Caribbean roots.
One of the challenges of being from the diaspora here in North America, being kind of the son of emancipated slaves, is that we were cut off at the root of our culture.
Also, in 2010, he visited the West African nation of Liberia. His mission there, I'll find out. My guest today as I report is Matthew Green, the first black councillor in the city of Hamilton in Ontario, Canada. Mr. Matthew Green, councillor in Hamilton, welcome to my program.
Jefferson, welcome to Hamilton. I apologize the weather is so cold, but hopefully the hospitality is warm.
I'm getting used to it. May I first of all congratulate you on your success, becoming the first black person to be elected as a councillor in Hamilton, and also being the very youngest as well. Did you see this coming?
Well, you know, we have a long history here in Hamilton. My family goes back multiple generations, and so, you know, despite the fact that it is 2014 and I am being the first person of color, it was certainly something that I had been educated for and preparing for quite some time.
Your election actually reminds me on November the 5th, 2008, when then Senator Barack Obama became the first African American to be elected President of the United States of America. What kind of influence did those particular moments have on young politicians like yourself, you know, growing up and seeing the very first African American becoming a president of the USA?
Well, first of all, I'm very humbled by that. You know, that type of comparison obviously is quite humbling, but I can remember that day quite clearly. In fact, there's a small church just down the road from here called Sturt Memorial Church, and we all gathered as a community, even as Canadians here, we all gathered as a community to watch that moment, and it was such a proud moment. And I think what it did for any person of color in North America is it let us understand that it could be done.
What for you would be the success story of Michelle Jean being the Governor General of Canada at a point in time? Do you think that she was successful in her position, being the very first black to occupy that office?
We have a parliamentary system, and that is an appointed position. And so it's an incredible achievement. What I would like to see are more elected officials that have more parliamentary power and influence. I think that would be the success story that I'd like to see. Because of the way our parliamentary system works, we have elected generals and lieutenant generals, and so yeah, although I respect her accomplishment, I think I'd still like to see success at a much more practical political level.
Why do you think it's taking so long for African Americans to be holding such positions like you're holding? It's just amazing. Hamilton is a very old city. Why has it taken so long for a black person to hold a position like you're holding, being a councillor in Hamilton?
That's a great question. One that I probably don't fully have the answers to. But again, I think it goes back to our participation at the table, and whether it's at partisan political parties, but the challenges we've had are very complex. The legacies of slavery and institutional racism, it's a challenge for people. What we tried to do was just make sure that we worked twice as hard to overcome these barriers.
And that brings mind to the question of immigration. You had President Barack Obama in the United States of America recently coming out with a policy that clearly defines the immigration status of African Americans or immigrants who've lived in the USA for 5 years to have their green cards and all that. Do you see this as a good initiative on his part?
Well, I think it's always been noted that America is a country of immigrants, and so what they're doing is finally recognizing the people that have been working in their economies for a very long time. I think that his legacy on that particular issue is going to be cheered and celebrated for decades. In a Canadian context, our birth rates are not sustaining our economy. We need immigration here to be financially viable as a country and as a nation. So we need to find ways that accept, and not just accept, actually going beyond accept, I would say, to encourage and promote immigration.
Do you see a black person becoming a prime minister in Canada one day?
Oh, most certainly, most certainly. And I think, it all comes down to participation. We have a long legacy of participation, especially here from Hamilton. We have a wonderful honor of having the first lieutenant governor and the first black Canadian in Lincoln Alexander, the Honorable Lincoln Alexander, who was for me a personal inspiration from a very young age. Somebody who in the 60s accomplished things that we are only now beginning to catch up to as a community.
And tell us more about your personal background. I mean, stories have been told many years ago about how the first few blacks got into Canada back in the 1600s when the first black person arrived in Canada. What kind of knowledge do you have about your personal background?
Well, I know Matthew DaCosta was his name. He came here as an interpreter. It was the first one in the early settlement days. But of course, what Canada is most known for is being the end of the Underground Railroad. So you'll hear Negro spirituals, you'll hear the story of the Underground Railroad when blacks from the South would escape slavery. They would follow the North Star and find the Promised Land. This, for escaped black slaves at that time, was the Promised Land, and that's the heritage that I'm honored to share. I am the son of emancipated, freed slaves who came to Canada and settled in the 1800s. Participated in the communities then and continue to do so today.
Your background from the Caribbean?
No, sir. It's actually it'd be from Maryland.
Okay.
So as the slave trade came into the United States of America, the runaway slaves would have followed the Underground Railroad and settled in Canada. So as you know, millions came to North America. Many more millions went to Brazil and South America and the Caribbean. But my roots were from the United States via Africa, and then of course being biracial, obviously my mother being of Canadian descent.
You're a councillor in Hamilton right now.
I am.
Quite an enviable position for you, your age, being the youngest to occupy this office.
Certainly one of great responsibility and in a job and an honor that I hold very seriously.
And your campaign was a very successful one.
It was.
The people see you as a sociable person.
I would like to think so. Yeah, I'm a community organizer, and we ran a horizontal campaign, so it wasn't a traditional partisan campaign that was heavy with hierarchy. We allowed people to come in and participate in the process, and we connected them to the process in the community, and I think that's where our success came from.
And like Obama, you also had a lot of the African Americans supporting you and backing you.
We had the community support. We had probably the most diverse, ethnically, racially, socially, economically diverse campaign teams the city has seen in quite some time.
Tell me about institutions here. Are there enough jobs in Hamilton, really?
No. I mean, the reality is we're in a shifting economy. We're going away from an industrial age when people used to be able to get out of high school and get a really good paying job in our steel factories. Now students are coming out of university straddled in debt and unable oftentimes to get the paying jobs that are required to be able to buy a home and settle down.
And so that's working to your disadvantage, right?
Most certainly.
And of course then it means that you have a lot of work to do as well.
And we also have a lot of opportunity.
What do you think is lacking in Hamilton that you have this working to your disadvantage?
Well, Hamilton has the distinction of being what we call a sanctuary city. So in policy and in theory, we're a place that's very accepting to new Canadians and new immigrants. Statistically speaking, new Canadians are coming to Hamilton and they're also leaving. Because the reality is, the practical reality for a lot of people is there's still the institutional barriers. There's still challenges with having their qualifications met here. But in an African context, one of the things I'm fascinated by is watching the new influx of Africans that are coming to Hamilton and getting involved in small business, taking on academia, and integrating into the community in a way that's offering a tremendous amount of value.
You're a business person.
Yeah, I consider myself a social entrepreneur.
You have a gym.
I do. Well, I think personal development is a natural extension into community development. So the dynamics that you would see from team sports, from group activities, is really about community development. It's about asset-based community development. So it was a natural progression into what we were trying to do politically.
And you've become a people's person.
I think I've always been a people person. Yeah, most certainly. I'm a man of the people.
I want, for the benefit of my global viewers, I want them to take a look at this particular campaign message that you gave to the people of Hamilton, your description of this particular city and how it actually worked to your advantage. Take a look at this.
You know, in a lot of ways, I think Hamilton was a place that as a teenager, most of us were just waiting to leave. You know, it was a time when the industries were shifting and a lot of us didn't feel like we could find employment here. And when I left, I gotta be honest, I never thought I'd come home. So I'm glad that I did. Just bought a house on Holton Avenue and opened up my business on Ottawa Street. And I'm very happy that I decided to come back and be a part of the community. What I love about Ward 3 is it's that place in our city where everybody can meet on the level. It doesn't matter, you know, where you came from. Everybody's here. We're all kind of rooting towards the same end, and that's going to be to have this vibrant, safe community and still, you know, be able to afford things that they might not be able to afford in other neighborhoods. You know, rent. Affordable housing is a huge issue. And this is that one community that's left in the city where it doesn't matter what your income is. There is a place for you. For a long time, we've been an underdog. We've been a place where people felt that they might have to move to. And what we're seeing now is that it's emerging as a community of choice. People who have never lived in the city before, when they move here, deciding to move into our neighborhoods, to be a part of our communities, to enjoy the natural environment that we have with places like Gage Park and some of our cultural gems like the new stadium that will be built. So I am running for Ward 3 Councillor because I'm fully invested in this neighborhood. I live here, I'm going to raise my family here, and I own my business here. And I know that government is not some abstract place that's like a castle with a moat that people have to have a secret dock to get across. It's really just a process. And all I want to do is share the process of our local government with the people who actually live here. Like, you're either going to sit on the sidelines and watch, or you're going to get in the game and participate and be a part of the conversation, sit around the table where decisions are made. We haven't been present. That's the reality. There's always going to be people wanting to come into our neighborhoods and tell us what's best for us. And I think that this is the year that stops. We're ready. We're ready to be at that table. So Jefferson, welcome to Hamilton. I want to take an opportunity to invite you into our campaign office.
Wow, thank you. When we return, Matthew Green visited the West African nation of Liberia in 2010 with the purpose of establishing a multi-million-dollar library facility, but something else grabbed his attention.
And so a reporter was in this city square talking about just kilometers away, there's a war raging on, as though this was some kind of dangerous place to be. And when I arrived in the city, what I saw was celebration, exuberance.
Plus, what does Africa need to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of development?
We need entrepreneurs, you know, we need engineers, we need doctors, we need academics, and I think that is the opportunity in the continent of Africa as an emerging geographic power in the world.
we seek to rebuild an economy that will offer a decent living wage to enable our families to fully participate in our community. We know that as neighbors, we must spend our hard-earned dollars to support the local small businesses. And as local small businesses, we know that we have to hire the local workforce here first.
Mr. Green, that's your campaign message to the people of Hamilton, and they ended up voting massively for you, obviously because of your charismatic nature. And what do you want to see changed in this particular community, especially among the black, community in Hamilton?
That's a fantastic question, Jefferson. I think it is training their successors. Any good leadership brings leadership along with it. And that's one of the things that we've lacked in this community, is making sure that if we're blazing a trail, that we're bringing the youth along with us, that we're bringing other people and building out capacity and allowing more people to share the leadership, because I believe that leadership needs to be shared by the many and not kept by the few. Oftentimes we find ourselves marginalizing our own communities by creating our own little special interest groups, from the diaspora, be it any country or any island. We need to come together and have a little bit more solidarity. We need to participate collectively as a community.
So you're thinking that having an African bloc, a Caribbean bloc, and all those things are not necessary?
Well, it's not that it's not necessary. Certainly the cultures have their own nuances, but politically and economically, I think we have to show more solidarity.
How much do you follow events in Africa?
Actually, because of the online presence, I follow it quite a bit. In fact, you have quite a following.
Tell me, because you were in Liberia in the year 2010. Why Liberia?
Well, one of the privileges I've had here in meeting a lot of the new Canadians coming into Hamilton is I always extend the offer to help anybody who settles here. And I had the privilege of meeting a good friend of mine who's become a brother, Leo Johnson. Through his vision, we created a plan for the Liberian Learning Center. And so we had the privilege of traveling to Liberia on a site development trip to get a chance to push that project forward. What
did you see? What was your first impression about Liberia and about Africa? Because obviously that was your first African country to have visited. What was your first impression when you got to that particular country?
What struck me was resilience. Despite, actually, the irony of this is that there was a CNN segment that I had watched in Lofa County, Longiman City, because I guess there had been a civil war outbreak just across the border. And so a reporter was in this city square talking about just kilometers away, there's a war raging on, as though this was some kind of dangerous place to be. And when I arrived in the city, what I saw was celebration, exuberance. I saw because it was for the Independence Day. And so the stark difference between what was actually being reported in the West versus what was happening on the ground, I felt safe, I felt welcome, I felt the hospitality of the Liberian people, something that I'll never forget.
Do you think that that's actually what happens when you don't have your own people reporting issues on the ground, when a continent would always have to rely on the Western media, to tell their stories for them?
Sure, and the distribution of bureau chiefs. If you were to look at Europe and see the coverage of major news stream media outlets, they'll have bureau chiefs in every country. They might have 2 or 3 in the entire continent of Africa. So how is somebody supposed to have nuanced discussions about the complexity of Africa and the countries that are inside, and even the cultures inside the countries that are in Africa? That's one thing, obviously, in Liberia with the various cultural differences that are there and the nuances. It's almost as though Western media kind of ignores the complexity of these issues.
Do you have any intentions of going back to Africa anytime soon?
Most certainly, absolutely. As I shared with you earlier, one of the challenges of being from the diaspora here in North America, being kind of the son of emancipated slaves, is that we were cut off at the root of our culture. So we lost that, and the culture here is very much tied to a legacy of slavery. And what I reconnected with when I was in Liberia, for me, it felt like I was in a lot of ways coming home. And so I certainly look forward to coming back and hope that this project is an opportunity to do that.
What would be your response, especially to the global response when the few cases of Ebola virus was reported in Africa, and the kind of panic that it actually sparked around the world?
There's a lot of complexity tied up in that question. Certainly, mainstream media is sensationalist. mainstream media picks up on these type of epidemics almost on a regular cycle, whether it's Ebola, H1N1, swine flu, it goes on. We had SARS here in Toronto that was massive, and in fact probably, you know, affected at a much higher rate. I think the fear that came out of the Ebola was the visuals and the process for which people are affected by it. But certainly, you know, given the fact that we have our own complexities here with disease, with violence, with depression, and you know, I think it's kind of naive for us in the West to sit here and you know, judge what's happening in West Africa. You know, I think the success story that came out was how Nigeria dealt with it. Nobody's talking about that.
Nobody's talking about that.
You know, and I think that's something that's very interesting. And what was also challenging for me is that the treatments, the difference in the treatments. So the people who came from the West and went home and the treatment that they had, and the focus of the story being about the 1 or 2 people there when there were literally thousands of people being affected by it back in West Africa. So I think that's where the challenge lied for me.
What would be your final word to the continent of Africa? I mean, it's a very rich continent.
Yes.
No two ways about that. You can talk about oil. You can talk about gold. Ghana, for example. You can talk about Nigeria being great oil producing country. All these resources from Africa. And yet you have a continent that is still railing and lacking in so many things. What do you think the African continent is lacking? What do you think needs to be done to see the continent of Africa where it's supposed to be?
I think we need more people like yourself, Jefferson. No, seriously, we need people who are innovative, who are controlling their own narrative, and that's a big piece. We need entrepreneurs, you know, we need engineers, we need doctors, we need academics, and I think that is the opportunity in the continent of Africa as an emerging geographic power in the world. Because the reality is it still has those resources. Now the opportunity are for the politicians, the elected officials to work to control the resources in a way that benefits the people of their countries.
Do you see yourself as a Prime Minister in Canada one day?
That's a little bit far down the line. I see myself as being fully busy with the work of Hamilton here. So, but certainly, if the calling comes, that might be in the cards one day.
But it's going to happen one day.
If you say so, then I'm on my way.
Matthew Green, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jefferson. I appreciate it.
Jefferson Sackey Reports is produced in Canada by Tristan Wally Media and distributed worldwide by CTV. It's exclusive in Ghana on the Joy News channel on Multi-TV. You can follow Jefferson Sackey on social media on the following handles. You can also communicate with our guest on Twitter. Ask a question and we will surely get back to you.